He called 999 in the middle of the night. His voice was calm, controlled, almost too controlled. He said he'd found his wife face down on the bed, not breathing. He said he didn't know what happened. He said he was scared. And then, still on the phone, he attempted CPR. The dispatcher praised him, told him he was doing amazingly, told him he was giving her the best chance. But when paramedics arrived at the house in Histon, Cambridgeshire, they noticed something that would quietly unravel everything. There was no sign that CPR had been attempted at all. Robert James Hammond had been married to Sian for nearly 30 years. They met as teenagers, got married at 18, built a life together, mortgage brokerage, financial advisory work, a family home, holiday properties, 2 daughters they were both devoted to. By every measure visible to the outside world, they had made it. Friends described them as a warm couple, sociable, generous. Sian herself was remembered as kind, bubbly, and deeply loving. A devoted mother. An academic high achiever, a biochemistry graduate who had worked as a research scientist before stepping back to raise their girls and build the business alongside her husband. She had recently completed her first 10K run. She had climbed Ben Nevis. She was by all accounts thriving. No one in her circle had any idea anything was wrong. That was exactly how Robert Hammond needed it to stay. Because behind the holidays and the properties and the comfortable life, something had been rotting for years. Hammond had overextended himself. Property renovations had spiraled. The businesses had accumulated roughly £300,000 in debt, to Legal & General, to HMRC, to a short-term capital funding company, and more. He was personally liable for a significant portion of it, and rather than face it, he lied. He told representatives from Legal & General that he had been diagnosed with cancer, that he'd had a mental breakdown, that he'd relapsed. He told HMRC the same. He told creditors that he and Sian were separating, that a divorce was complicating the finances. He fabricated reasons why properties couldn't be sold. He even lied to an HMRC representative that he was waiting for a call from his oncologist, just to end an uncomfortable phone call. None of it was true. And crucially, Sian knew almost none of it was happening. The judge who sentenced Hammond was clear on this. He was satisfied that Sian had only recently become aware of the financial problems. If at all, by the weekend she died. Hammond had managed the accounts, managed the creditors, managed the lies. He had kept it all invisible to her. She had no reason to think anything was wrong. They had just bought a holiday home in Norfolk. They had just come back from a foreign holiday. But by the last week of October 2023, Hammond was reaching what one HMRC representative described as the end of the road. On Thursday, the 26th of October, 4 days before Sian's death, Hammond opened his laptop and searched for something. He searched for how much diazepam constitutes a fatal overdose. He knew Sian took diazepam occasionally. He also knew she would be taking it that weekend. One of their daughters was flying home from Switzerland, and Sian was terrified of flying, even when it was someone else in the air. She took it to manage the anxiety. He knew exactly when she would be medicated. He knew exactly how vulnerable that made her. If you feel the weight of what that search means, let that sit for a moment, because it gets worse. On the Sunday morning, the 29th of October, just before lunchtime, Hammond conducted a fresh set of internet searches. This time he was looking up how to disable the passenger airbag on a Ford Focus of a particular age. One of the family cars was a Ford Focus, the same age. And Sian was sometimes a passenger when he drove. The judge was unambiguous. These searches were carried out because Hammond was by then actively researching ways to kill his wife. He had considered an overdose. He had considered a staged car crash. He was working through options. And then, 4 days before she died, he had done something else. He had paid off the arrears on Sian's life insurance policy. The policy was worth £450,000. The weekend itself, from the outside, looked entirely ordinary. Their daughters were both away. The couple spent time in the office. On Saturday night, they went for a meal with friends. On Sunday, they went to the gym together, had dinner, watched television. Later that evening, they had sex. And then, at some point in the night, in the bedroom they had shared for years, Robert Hammond strangled his wife. The forensic evidence was specific. He used his bare hands, compressing her neck. The pathologist estimated it would have taken at least a minute. There were defensive injuries on Sian's face and arms, gripping marks, signs of a struggle. She had fought back. She knew what was happening to her. The judge described the assault as brutal and determined. Afterwards, Hammond put on a fitness tracker, or took one off, and the heart rate data from his Whoop app became one of the most quietly damning pieces of evidence in the case. It showed a spike in his heart rate beginning at 11:56 p.m. that remained elevated until 12:19 a.m. Then it stopped recording, as though the device had been removed. At that time, Hammond had claimed he was alone downstairs watching television. At 1:50 in the morning, he called 999. If you're watching this and something about this case is already unsettling you, you're not alone. Drop a comment below. And if you want to follow more cases like this, subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next. The 99 call was, in the judge's words, a performance. Hammond told the operator he'd found Sian face down, said she never slept on her front, said he was calling her name, said he was turning her over, said he was going to try to resuscitate her. He was praised by the dispatcher, coached through it, told he was doing the right things. When paramedics arrived, they found no evidence that CPR had been attempted. Sian was pronounced dead at the scene. In the days that followed, Hammond played what the judge called the part of the grieving husband. He texted a family friend at 4 in the afternoon to say Sian had passed away last night in her sleep and that it's been a tough day. When the friend and her husband came to see him 2 days later, Hammond spoke about the night of Sian's death. He mentioned that they'd had sex. He described Sian, his wife now dead for 2 days, in terms that left the friend deeply uncomfortable. She told the court it had not seemed appropriate to ask questions at the time. It was in almost every detail the behavior of a man managing a narrative. Not a man in grief, but the financial trail was what truly buried him. On the very day Sian died, the 30th of October, a debt collection agent from Legal & General called Hammond about the £200,000 he owed the company. He told her Sian had died that morning, and even though he said they were in the process of divorcing, she had been the mother of his children. This was a lie. They were not divorcing. Hammond had been telling creditors they were separating for months. It was one of the excuses he used to delay payments. He repeated it even as his wife lay dead. On the 3rd of November, barely 4 days after the murder, Hammond called the agent back. He wanted to know if he could pay off the debt faster. He said he would be receiving a life insurance payout. He asked whether the firm could review the interest payments. 4 days. The prosecutor put it plainly. Hammond had eyes on the prize of Sian's life insurance payoff. When he asked about receiving Sian's death certificate, investigators noted this too. It was a necessary step before a life insurance claim could begin. He had paid the arrears on her policy 4 days before killing her. He had searched for ways to kill her days before that. The entire sequence, the timing, the searches, the insurances, the debt calls, formed a picture that the jury ultimately found impossible to look away from. At trial, Hammond denied everything. He claimed Sian had been fully aware of the financial situation. He claimed she had even agreed with him on the strategy of lying to creditors. The judge rejected this entirely. He was satisfied that Sian's aversion to stress made it inconceivable she would have participated in that deception, and that Hammond had simply constructed yet another lie, this time to distribute the blame onto the woman he had killed. He had no convictions, no history of violence. Dozens of character witnesses testified to his warmth and the high regard in which he was held. Friends, colleagues, clients. Even Sian's own mother and sister wrote to the court asking for leniency. His daughters, who were in court for the sentencing, sat in the front row of the public gallery. During breaks, when Hammond could briefly see them through the dock, he placed his hand over his heart. They smiled, waved, and blew kisses back. They left the courtroom the moment their father was taken down. The judge, Mr. Justice Kavanaugh, was measured and thorough in his sentencing remarks. He set a starting point of 30 years for the minimum term, reflecting the fact that the murder had been committed in the expectation of financial gain. He then applied a significant reduction, acknowledging that while financial gain was clearly part of Hammond's motivation, it may not have been the only or even the primary trigger in the moment itself. The judge considered that the murder, while premeditated, had not been carefully planned in the way it ultimately occurred. There had been no overdose, no staged accident. What happened instead, he concluded, had the character of something that broke loose. Perhaps a confrontation, perhaps Sian finally learning what he had been hiding, perhaps the pressure of years of lies collapsing in a single moment. No one can be certain of the immediate trigger. Only one person knows, and he has not told the truth. 5 aggravating factors were outlined: the degree of premeditation, the domestic abuse context, Sian's vulnerability in that moment, the sustained and brutal nature of the attack, the false CPR, the devastating impact on their daughters. The sole significant mitigation was Hammond's previous good character. The minimum term was set at 24 years, minus 253 days already served on remand. He will be 69 years old at the earliest before the parole board can even begin to consider his release. There is a detail in the sentencing remarks that is easy to miss, but it stays with you. The judge noted that Hammond actually had the means to resolve his debts without killing anyone. He had cash reserves. He had equity across the properties he and Sian jointly owned. Had he chosen to sell, he could have cleared what he owed. But that would have meant losing the life they had built. The houses, the status, the image of success. It would have meant confessing to Sian that everything she thought was real had been constructed on a lie. It would have meant dismantling the version of himself that everyone admired. Chose not to do that. He chose something else entirely. Sian Hammond was 46 years old. She was proud of her scientific career. She was devoted to her daughters. She was, by every account offered in court, a warm and loving presence in the lives of everyone who knew her. She was killed in her own bedroom by the man she had shared her life with for 3 decades while wearing her pajamas. The judge said it directly. It must have been particularly terrifying for Sian to be attacked in the place she felt most safe, by the person above all others she should have been able to trust to protect her. She had no idea what was coming. Until at some point in the darkness of that Sunday night, she did. Cases like this one sit heavily because they dismantle something people need to believe, that we can know the people closest to us. That love is a kind of protection. Robert Hammond was described by almost everyone who knew him as warm, funny, popular, trustworthy. A good husband, a good father, a good man. He was also, as the judge put it, a habitual and accomplished liar, willing to deceive anyone who stood between him and what he wanted, including, in the end, the woman who had spent her entire adult life beside him. If this case made you think, or made you feel something, leave a comment. Tell me what part of this stayed with you. And if you want to stay with stories that go beneath the surface, subscribing means you'll always be here when the next one starts. There's always another layer to find.